Yeah, so I'm going to go and for all of you that have joined us, thank you for being here. Today is going to be a really fantastic seminar led by Dr. Rozin. I'll introduce him formally in a moment. Just as a reminder, this is all about the conversation that we have going on here. So please hit that chat button. Make sure you choose either all panelists and attendees, or it might say everyone in Zoom. I forget what the option says these days. And just kick things off right now by letting us know where you're clicking in from. And just say hi to all of your friends and colleagues across the food industry. Before we jump into things with Dr. Rozin, I did want to just share a couple of quick stats because I know this is something we all care about. You know, we've been tracking a couple of questions over the course of the last year plus about whether people are very concerned about COVID, as well as whether people are avoiding eating out at restaurants. That very concerned about COVID number is holding steady at about 51% in our most recent data, which is literally just from 2 days ago. So that's held steady, but there is some really good news. If we look at the other number, which is, are you definitely avoiding eating out? We've now dropped to 33% of people, which is the lowest level we've seen since the very, very early days of the pandemic. And hopefully as vaccination and other initiatives continue, we'll see this as a real prolonged dropping of that number to pre-pandemic number levels at some point. So that's really, really good news. People still are concerned about COVID, but we're much more open to eating out now than we were. Keep in mind, this number was nearly 70% a year ago. And here we are now in the low 30s and hopefully continuing that downward trend. As a reminder, we continue to publish new information on COVID and the food industry every few days on our website. So please visit datassential.com/coronavirus. It's always there available for free. We just ask that you share it with your colleagues and peers across the industry so we can all recover as quickly as possible. And also, if you haven't had a chance to use the new scores, we invite you to do that. Scores is a system that tracks what consumers think about every new item that launches on top chain menus. Will they buy it? Do they find it unique? What do they like about it? Etc. It's fantastic, and it's been completely updated to be even easier to use and feature even more information than before. So go check it out if you haven't already. With that, I do want to just remind us, today your keyboard is your best friend. We have with us Dr. Paul Rozin, who's really just unbelievably wise in the ways of food and why we make the decisions that we do. He's going to have a lot to cover with us, but I want to invite all of us to just ask questions as we go. And Paul, I mean, I'm assuming it'd be okay if people asked just random questions, not even necessarily related to what's on the slide at the time. We can sort of collate those. I just feel like you're such a resource to have available. We should take advantage of that. So
that's fine with me.
Yeah, so ask questions. Marie, if I can ask you to monitor some of what's coming in, and we could throw some of those questions out as we go, that would be great. But this is your opportunity to ask questions to the Oracle and actually get some real answers back. So please take advantage of that and make sure you choose everyone / all panelists and attendees when you ask your question. So Paul, I'm going to hand things over to you, but first a quick introduction. Paul Rozin is professor of psychology at University of Pennsylvania. He's the world's foremost expert on disgust and the world's foremost expert on food and psychology and why we make the choices that we make around food. I consider you, Paul, to be one of the most interesting people I've ever met. So that's a high bar that you're gonna have to clear today, but I have no doubt that you will. And from this point forward, I will be just your humble slide clicker, and I'm handing things over to you right now.
Thank you, Jack. I just want to give my bona fides here. I have actually eaten 3 meals. I'm in New York City now, and I've eaten 3 meals in restaurants this week, 2 of them indoors, and they were really good. And it's been, this last 2 weeks for me has been a rebirth of my food life because, you know, going out to eat is a special treat now. That's really nice. So I'm going to talk to you about chili pepper today. And I'll tell you what the next slides, I guess. I'm your professional clicker, but you can't tell what I want next.
I can't read your mind.
That would be a really professional.
Yeah.
I mean, so I just want to say to you that you're all interested in food and getting people to eat certain kinds of foods. Imagine that you're a marketing person or for a company or our own restaurant owner, and someone says, I've got this new food for you. This is great. The Mexicans love it. And takes out a chili pepper. He says, try it. And you try it and say, oh, God, get this out of here. I mean, it tastes terrible, right? If you haven't had it before. What's the chance of marketing a new food that tastes terrible when you first eat it? Basically zero. And yet this food has become the most widely consumed spice in the world, outside of garlic, probably, if you count garlic as a spice. So let's go to the next slide. So it's an innately, you don't have, you can't click one topic after another. It's set up to do that.
Oh, I think the version I got, it was all sort of one at a time. If you want,
mine was one at a time when I sent it. All right, well, I'll live with it. I'm going to ask you, I never believed that you should show pictures for a minute ahead of what you're talking about. So you're going to have to see that. So don't only look at the first one. So chili pepper is innately aversive, and as I said, it's amazing that it got to where it's been. There's a very fundamental distinction you have to be aware of, and that's in order to discuss this, and that's the difference in all food. It's important between preference and liking. Generally speaking, you prefer the things you like, but not always. For example, a dieter might prefer cottage cheese to ice cream in a choice, but they would like ice cream better, right? So some people eat some things because they're told they're healthy or something like that, or someone doesn't cook well, but they want to be polite. But the burn of chili pepper is liked. People like the very same thing that people don't like when they don't like it. So there's no difference in what's coming from your mouth to your brain, but somehow your brain has decided that this signal, which used to be terrible, is now delicious. Okay, next slide. All right, so here we go again with all of them. But okay, so this is from the diary of Christopher Columbus, the first thing. And it says, in the 1493, toda la gente no come sin ella, que le haya muy sana. They eat nothing without it and deem it very wholesome. He is, of course, astonished by this fact. And Bernardo de las Casas, one of the early Spaniards in the Americas, said, without chili, they do not think they are eating. So here are these Europeans coming to the Americas, not, of course, the United States, but the more tropical Americas. These people are eating this stuff. That's crazy. Nobody should eat this. Okay, next slide. So this is just a map for you of all the chili peppers come from the Americas. A lot of them from Mexico, but some from Brazil and South America. They go to Spain with the early explorers, and then they spread all over the world, particularly to West and East Africa, to South Asia, Southeast Asia, Southern China, Indonesia, and in the form of sweet peppers, which were, by the way, developed by the Europeans. The Hungarians found a way to change hot pepper, to breach hot pepper without the hotness. And that is our sweet pepper. And they became very popular in parts of Europe, especially the Mediterranean. So this is an amazing course for such an unlikely substance. Next slide. This is a Nigerian market, and there's chili peppers all over the place. They didn't have anything before 1500, perhaps 1600. Next slide. Just to remind you, the Colombian Exchange is the greatest exchange of food that ever occurred. Post 1492, it's named for Columbus. And a lot of foods went from the Americas to Eurasia and Africa. Oh, there are foods, of course, like cows, that went the other way. But here's what came, among other things, chocolate. Remember, the world of Europe, which you may be most familiar with of other countries, didn't have any of these things at all until after Columbus. Chocolate, vanilla, chili peppers, tomatoes, potatoes, squash, peanuts, manioc, and corn. There's more. Imagine the cuisine of the Mediterranean, the North Africa and the Southern Europe, without tomatoes. Italian cuisine without tomatoes, without sweet peppers. Imagine the German food without potatoes. I mean, this was a really big change.
Is
So chili
what is
pepper, of all
manioc? Is
these things,
that what
what?
is Dr. Rozin, what is manioc? Is that yucca?
No, manioc is a tapioca. It's a major starch. It's used a lot in West Africa now as a basic staple. And its virtue is that it's very hardy, very easy to grow it. It comes from Brazil. So it's one of the world's major staple foods. So corn, as you probably know, is the most efficient food to get to calories in the world and is very common. Even in Europe where they don't eat it much, they feed it to their animals. The interesting thing is that if you look at these things, chili peppers and corn, chili peppers in the hot form and corn did not make it as human foods in Europe. They were available, and tomatoes took over the whole Mediterranean. Okay, and chocolate, I don't have to say anything about. But interesting thing about chocolate is that it's not terribly popular in any part of Asia or in Africa. And yet it's in Europe, and America, it's considered like the greatest thing. Okay, next slide. So in Mexico, where we'll focus, there are 4 species of chili pepper. The most common is called Capsicum annuum. They're all in the genera Capsicum. We have records that goes back as far as 9,000 years, the Mexicans eating it, and they started cultivating it between 5,000 and 7,000 years ago. So that they had a long history of chili pepper before it was, quote, discovered by the explorers. Actually, Columbus discovered it in the Caribbean, not in Mexico. Cortez, of course, in Mexico. Next slide. So this is a picture from the American Indians in I think this is an Aztec picture discovered by the Spanish discovered these things and published them. And that little bowl in the middle of that table is chocolate, frothed chocolate, which was very popular, very bitter, by the way. It was not milk chocolate. They didn't have milk chocolate. It's really bitter chocolate. And it was laced with chili pepper. So it's a bitter, very irritating spice. We call chili pepper an irritant spice. So this is just a picture of, it's celebrated. It was a special treat there. Next slide. This is, as some of you may be familiar, a modern Mexican dish, mole poblano. And it is a dish, it's famous because it's a dish it's a savory dish that uses chocolate, which is unusual. Of course, chocolate's from Mexico, but the next slide just shows you the recipe for that. And I have a little arrow there. In that recipe, it calls for 1/2 cup plus 2 tablespoons oil. Then it says 7 ounces of chili anchos, 8 ounces of chili pasillas, and 10 ounces of chili mulatos, and then 4 chili chipotles. So there are 4 different chilies going in there. By the way, they're not hot chilies. And they take out the seeds and the membranes to make them less hot when they make this. So the Mexicans could get a relatively not hot chili by taking out the seeds and the what's called the placenta. Okay, next slide. This is a picture also from these codices that the Spanish discovered. And this is interesting because a little child is being held over a fire in which chili peppers are burning. And the child is being punished because the burn of the chili comes up in the smoke to the eyes and it hurts. And one of the fascinating things is that although Mexicans love this hot stuff in their mouth, they don't want it in their eyes. I mean, you think if you like the burn, you like the burn. No, it's just in the mouth and on the skin maybe for later on. Okay, next. This is a village. I went to Mexico to study chili pepper and how it gets to be eaten because that's where it comes from, most of it. And this is a mountain village, a village on the plateau of Mexico near the city of Oaxaca, where I spent a month looking at how people dealt with chili pepper. And next slide, one of the things I want to show you is that the animals in the village live around the house. They just walk around. This is a village of 1,500. It had 1 toilet, 1 standard flush toilet in a little sanitation center. They did have electricity. And the cows are not really what I wanted to show you here, but the pigs and the dogs also are running around all the time free. And that's relevant to something I'm going to tell you later. Okay, next slide. This is a woman in the village making the daily salsa. They make it for the day and they throw it out, what they don't eat. And it's two major components, or two distinctly Mexican foods, tomatoes, and those are chilies being ground. Okay, and they would normally use a few different chilies, put them in there with a little salt and garlic, and then that's put on almost everything they eat that isn't stewed. Otherwise, they put the chilies in the stew. Yeah, next. Now, this is the cover of a cookbook written by my departed wife called the Flavor Principle Cookbook. And the idea of this cookbook is that most of the world's cuisines, except for the Northern European ones, basically, have a flavor that they put on almost every savory food they eat. In China, it's ginger root, rice wine, and soy sauce, varying by region from that. And in Mexico, there are two flavor principles. That is, flavors that are put on almost all food, either chili and lime, or more commonly, which is not on that cover, chili and tomato, as in the salsa. Next slide. Oh, this is just an illustration of that, lime, chili. This is, you're not supposed to be able to read this slide. People show these kinds of slides and expect you to read them. I don't expect you to see anything on this slide, except that there are a lot of things on this slide. This slide shows you all the aromatic substances that are in chili peppers. In other words, we shouldn't think of them as just burn. They are aromatic. They are full of flavor. You can all appreciate that in the sweet peppers. That's true of the hot peppers too. So a chili pepper is a really complex mix of all sorts of delicious aromas, flavors, plus the burn. Yeah, next. This is the, this is a typical Mexican woman in this village. And I said to her, would you take out all the chili peppers you have in your house right now? And she took out those, there are 6 of them. The last thing is the tomatillo, it's a variant of the tomato. But you see this woman in her house, she goes and buys them often. These people don't store things much, but look, she's got 6 of them in the house, 6 different ones. We think of chili pepper, well, that's a hot little thing, but no, in Mexico, chili peppers, each chili pepper has its own character, its own burn, its own flavor. Next slide. This is the chili market in Oaxaca. This is in the market in Oaxaca. And this is a stall that is just selling dried chili peppers. She has at least 20 different kinds of dried chili. And when people come there, they will order, you know, some 10 grams or 100 grams of this one and 100 grams of that one. So that they're actually thinking of which combination of chili peppers am I going to use? And each dish, as with the mole I showed you, has its own combination of burns and aromas. Next slide. This is just in one of these posters. You know, the chili peppers are very attractive. Here is one of those posters. Next slide is another poster. And of course, you know, they're grown as ornamental plants. Okay, next one. Now I just discovered this site in getting ready for this lecture. I've given you the URL there. So this was very good for getting pictures of chili peppers. So let me just show you a few. Next. This is the poblano. Now the Scoville, there's a measure of heat, how much burn a chili pepper has. It's called a Scoville unit. And this is 1 to 2,000 Scoville units, which is a pretty low level of burn. As you'll see, it gets much higher than that. Next slide. This is the dried version of that, called the chili ancho. It's often smoked and dried. It has the same burn level, of course. Next slide. This is the jalapeno, which you're more familiar with, and this has a higher Scoville level, you'll see. The most popular chili pepper. This is the dried version of the jalapeno, the chipotle. And now just the last one. This is the habanero, and that's 100,000 to 350,000 Scoville units. You don't want to put that one in your mouth and just chomp down on it. You'll be a very unhappy person. Though there are some people, and here, of course, we have the sweet peppers. which are all derived from that. Okay, the capsaicin is what makes the pepper hot. It's found primarily in the placenta and the seeds. The placenta is what connects the body to the seeds. There are 5 natural forms of capsaicin that we know of. It was originally used in Europe as a medicine and sometimes in Mexico too. It stimulates blood flow, an inflammatory response, salivation and gastric secretion, and sweating, but only on the face and neck. It's amazing. It doesn't cause sweating on the rest of the body. And this is a picture of the actual pepper, and there you can see that placenta is that portion in the middle, and that's where most of the hot heat comes from, but also the seeds. Next
Hey,
slide.
Paul, one thing I've learned in my nutrition education is capsaicin is also responsible for the health benefits of peppers. Like they say it can help our hearts and maybe speed up metabolism and things like that. So I wonder if that's correlated with how it increases blood flow. Do you think?
Well, it does increase blood flow to some structures, and it reduces heart rate. Well, I don't know if, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. Eating chili peppers reduces heart rate. It's probably capsaicin that does it. I don't, there's great health claims, as you all know, made for every kind of food, whoever's promoting it. So I don't know how much of that is true. Capsaicin, first of all, is poorly absorbed. Most of it passes in feces. And there's an old Hungarian saying paprika burns twice. And that refers to that very fact. It stimulates nerve endings. If you give you can't get a very high level of capsaicin in your blood because it's not absorbed well. But in rats, you can inject it into the blood. And they don't seem to object to that. But it destroys the center in their brain that controls temperature, and it destroys the receptor for irritants all over their body. So if you after you put that into a rat, if you put a little chili pepper solution in their eye, which would normally make the eye tear, it doesn't at all. It's a fascinating case where a high level of substance wipes out the receptor. Chili peppers have what's called a cholinergic action. Let's go back. Which is to say the cholinergic actions are things that include things like dropped heart rate and increased digestion. The basic maintenance, it's the opposite of an activating action, like you'd associate with adrenaline. And chili peppers are not toxic. That's what's interesting, but your body thinks they are. And your body, the inflammatory reaction comes from the body being fooled by the capsaicin. So from the plant's point of view, I've got something which will get animals scared and they won't eat me. Mammals, birds, by the way, eat hot peppers, but it keeps the mammals from eating me. Okay, next slide. There are 5 known, there may be more now when I did this was in the 70s. There were 5 known versions of capsaicin. They're listed on the left. You don't have to read them. They're similar molecules. But what's interesting is they have different burn properties. Some of them are very hot. Some of them not so much. Some of them have a rapid onset in the mouth. Others have a slow onset. And it was a researcher at McCormick, Todd, who actually found these things and looked at their sensory properties. So you may have noticed in eating hot food, sometimes it burns your lips, sometimes it's more in the back of your mouth, sometimes it doesn't burn much at first. Somebody says, that's really hot. And you eat and say, no, it's not hot. Whoa, whoa. So some of them burn slowly. So from the Mexican's point of view, the burn pattern is important. You get a different burn experience. Next slide.
Have you found, Paul, that someone who can tolerate one type of heat can tolerate all the other types too, or do they not overlap that way?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
If someone can take one of these types of hotness, can they generally take the other types as well?
Yes, I would assume yes. I always wanted to do a study in which I took somebody who didn't like hot food and got only the left side of their mouth to like it by only putting hot food on the left side. I never did that. I don't know if that's possible. I mean, it's hard to do it, but I don't know if it would work. The mouth seems to be treated as a whole, but I think that anyone who likes burns would like all these, but they might have a certain pattern they like best. Next slide. This is a typical family scene in the Mexican village I was in, or all of Mexico. 4 children aged 5 to 14. They're eating lunch, which is a tortilla, which you can see, the black beans in the center. And there's a little bowl in the middle, which has salsa, including chili pepper, of course. And you'll notice that the kids they don't have to put salsa on, but they do. And in this family, even the 5-year-old dipped his tortilla in there and made it hot. The boy on your right, who's 14, was the only person I have ever found who seems to have been desensitized from chili. He's like those rats I told you about. He could eat the hottest chili pepper and he showed no sign of sweating or anything. So he just, if you eat enormous amounts, I suppose that's possible. Next slide. This is the only store in that village. And notice the presence of course, all the sodas. And those things on your left are little packets, very inexpensive, of either sugar and fruit, like the sugar and lime or something like that. And the one on your extreme left is made of salt and chili pepper. And people were buying salt and chili pepper when for the same price they could get sugar and fruit. So I said, what a great opportunity. I can see how much people like hot pepper and what age it occurs. So next slide. Everyone knew these. I would take one of each kind, put them out, 5 things, and say to everyone I could find, including all the kids in the school, you can have one. Take whichever one you want. And I recorded what they would take. Okay. The next slide shows the results. This is the fastest data collection I ever had. I got most of the village in a few hours. So this is the percent for males and females. There's no male-female difference. Of the percent that they would choose the hot one. All right. And 20% would be what you'd expect that they were choosing at random. So you see the 2 3-year-olds, maybe the 4 5-year-olds are not liking it. By the age 6 or 7, they're on average preferring it to the sweet, sour ones. They love it. So I don't know. It's interesting that it goes down a little bit. I could talk about that, but not right now. But the point is that these people are preferring it to sweet. Next slide. As you get to like chili, you get to like it more and more strong up to a point, and then you stay there. You don't keep getting, you don't get to fire. Originally, when you eat it, it blocks the flavor. You say, I can't taste anything, right? Because it's burning. After a while, we've been able to measure this. People have normal taste perception with the pepper. You spread the context. You may start eating it in only one form, maybe on a tortilla, Mexico, or here, whatever, maybe on pizza. And then only a few people get to like the pure burn. That is, they would like capsaicin at low level with no food. For Mexico, chili burn is part of eating. Now, when you eat a hot food, of course, after you've swallowed the food, your mouth is still burning. They like that burn, but they don't like the burn, which is not part of an experience of eating. It's a fascinating thing. Next slide. This is just a correlation for Americans for liking chili pepper with other things. So it goes with liking black pepper, which is also an irritant, with horseradish, which is an irritant, with ginger, which is an irritant, raw onion. They all have the same irritating. It went with cigarettes, which is also an irritant. It doesn't go with quinine water or menthol. Now, quinine water is another innately aversive thing, bitter, but liking hot pepper doesn't particularly go along with liking bitter. It's interesting.
Did you see any negative correlations? People that like chili pepper don't like these things?
We didn't see anything in particular in this study. But we were mostly focusing on things that were irritants. Next slide. Okay. And we asked college students, what do you eat pepper with? And you see that this was in the 1980s before it became as popular as it is now. Pizza, meat and fish, hoagies, that's vegetables, and it goes down. And just as in Mexico, it's rarely eaten with dairy and sweets. It could be, and it's rarely eaten in beverages. And it's interesting, if you like the experience, why don't you like it in coffee or other things? But they don't. Okay. Now, I asked the people in the village, do your animals like chili pepper? And they said, what, are you crazy? Because I said in Spanish. And I said, but you don't know any animals that like chili pepper? No. I said, because your pigs and your dogs eat your garbage. And every day in the garbage, is the leftover stale tortillas and the salsa. So they're eating Mexican food every day, just like you are. Why don't they get to like it? And they thought it was really funny, even the thought that they would. So I said, would you mind if I checked? They said, of course not. So here's one of the little boys in the village. We're feeding him, in this case, a pig a tortilla just to get used to being fed that way. You know, people don't feed pigs tortillas. Next slide. But then we did serious research. Here's a dog in the village, and he's presented with two things, and we give him a choice. He's got a Cheeto without salsa, and the one on the lower one is the one with salsa. And we found that we tested a whole bunch of dogs and pigs this way, and we didn't find a single animal who would eat the hot one first. Of course, they'll eat the hot one because they're hungry, but they always eat the one without the salsa first. So as far as we could tell, everyone in the village over 5 loved this stuff, and not one of the animals did, even though they're eating the same food. And that was, to me, an important finding, because it suggests that there's something specially human about this. Next slide. Now let's talk about how you might acquire this liking. It is not desensitization. It isn't that after you eat chilies, it doesn't burn anymore. First of all, people say, I like the burn. They don't say it doesn't burn. Also, animals, if desensitization occurred, it would happen to the dogs too. I showed you that one boy, but very rare to find people who don't get the burn sensation. You could say, well, maybe people get rewarded because they're hungry, they eat something with chili pepper, they feel a little better. But that's true for animals too. And they don't get to like chili pepper. Next slide. Okay. Also, we know from psychology, probably most of you don't know this, it's an interesting fact that if you reward someone for eating food, often it's done with children, right? You want the kids to like spinach or something. So you say, eat the spinach and get dessert. That doesn't work. It's been shown many times. Kids will eat the spinach to get the dessert, but they won't get to like it. And we did a study on heroin addicts who get methadone, which is an opiate that substitutes for heroin. They get it. They come to a place in the hospital every day, and they drink a little methadone in Tang. It's flavored with Tang. Sometimes they're in a little bit of withdrawal, so the Tang makes them feel better, but they don't get to like Tang. And we find in general that people tend not to get to like the flavor of oral medicines, like say antacids. You eat an antacid, it has a flavor, right? Your stomach irritation goes away. We don't find people who are running around popping Tums because they love them. So there's something about being rewarded for something which blocks getting to like. Fascinating thing. Next slide.
Is there something that does get you to like things then, if it's not the reward system?
Well, that's what we're going to talk about now. Yeah.
Okay.
In a moment. Yeah. So one thing that gets people to like things is mere exposure. If you there's no question, it's not just about food, it's about anything. If you're exposed to something in a pretty neutral environment, you'll usually get to like it. Usually. Now, of course, the animals had exposure to chili pepper and they didn't get to like it. Humans, if they tried chili pepper once, they'd say, no more of this, right? But their culture gets them to continue to eat it because it's what everyone eats, so they don't have much choice. And it isn't just mere exposure in that case. It's something about the environment in which they eat the pepper. Next slide.
Is this mere exposure effect? Is that sort of unique to food, or is this true of almost everything in life?
The original study was done in a Psych 1, an intro psych class. The instructor, Robert Zients, presented a Turkish word to the class on the screen as a slide. And he presented it either once, 5 times, 10 times during the lecture. And then he asked people how much they liked the word. And the more they saw it, the more they liked it. That was the original study. Okay, next. Now, another mechanism is what's called evaluative conditioning. If you pair something with Pavlov's, with his dogs, if you pair something with something positive, the thing that you pair with it tends to become positive. Next slide. So the best example, if you pair a taste with nausea and half of you in the audience have had this experience, if you're like the rest of America, that you ate something and you got sick to your stomach, right? You threw up or you didn't. That makes you dislike a food. It's very powerful. Only one experience will do it. We showed that if you pair a taste with sugar, a neutral taste, you'll get to like that taste. It's been shown that if you pair a taste with positive facial expressions, people might get to like it. That may be what's going on in the Mexican dinner situation where all the rest of the family is enjoying the food and the kid doesn't like it. Coffee, probably liking comes as black coffee. You get coffee first with cream and sugar. It's nice and got the sweetness. And then you can gradually go to black coffee and like the bitter black coffee. We don't know exactly how that happens. Now, chili pepper is paired with satiation, but it doesn't seem that this process is really working very much for chili pepper. And I guess the animals get that too. They get the chili pepper and the satiation. Next slide.
Does that mean we should put the spinach in the dessert initially?
Well, one possibility, which people have not done much, is to pair. So for example, if you want kids to eat, I've done this, I've been involved in some inner city things to get kids to eat healthier, and they wouldn't eat the carrots. I said, well, put raisins in the carrots. They like raisins. And of course, carrot and raisin is a dish. And the people who were doing the program didn't like to do that. And I said, well, you could also put sugar into the carrots. They said, sugar's terrible. I said, you want to get the kids to like carrots, make it very well. Or I said, you don't like sugar. I said, use artificial sweeteners. And they were horrified at that. But in actual fact, it might be a way to get kids to eat vegetables.
And the idea is if you do that, they'll eventually like carrots on their own too, or only with the sweetener in there?
Well, the hope is that after you, and that's what we did with the sugar, after we paired the taste with sugar, they drank sugar water with the flavor in it. We then showed that they still like the flavor after the sugar was gone, without the sugar. But again, this doesn't always work. It's a process that it's like mere exposure. It doesn't always work. Next slide. The next thing I wanted to mention is social influence. That's the big one. Social influence means that other people are eating and that you see their expressions, they're enjoying it. And that's a very powerful thing. A lot of advertisement is based on this, right? You watch somebody else eating a product and being very happy. And that there's no question that works. It could work by value conditioning. It could work by another social pair. That's certainly what's going on with the Mexicans. And you could say those Mexican animals are not sitting around the table when they're eating that chili pepper with other people enjoying it, talking about how they like the burn and so on. We don't understand that process, and that's very important. And the last thing I want to talk about, which took me from chili pepper to a lot of other things, is what I call benign masochism. Next slide. This shows you, this is a curve that's liking for pepper, liking for cracker, which has pepper in it. And this is the intensity of the cracker. So people come in who like chili pepper. We give them a cracker with a little chili. They rate how much they like it. They like it a little bit. Then we say, okay, we'll give you a stronger one, okay? And they say yes. And we go up and up and up, and they like it more and more. And then we get to a point where they really love it. And we say, how about the next one? It's stronger. They say, oh no, that would be too strong. What it seems like is the burn they like is just below the level of unbearable pain. And that suggests that there's something the pain is something a positive part of this. Okay, so that's what benign masochism is. It's enjoying your body saying that this is bad, but you know it's really okay. So all that burn, your mouth is telling your brain, stop eating this, and you know it's not going to hurt you, and you love it. It's mind over matter. Okay, next slide.
Is that notion of going right to the edge common in other things that people do?
Yes, yes. Most people, which we're going to get to in a minute, yes, absolutely. People enjoy the sweating and eye tearing that chili pepper produces. That's their body trying to get rid of it. And they're enjoying that process. And as you know, many marathon runners enjoy the pain and exhaustion at the end of their run. Yeah, go ahead. There are chili pepper eating contests. You all know about them. By the way, I don't know if this is common in Mexico, but it's very common in Texas and places like that. Here's an example. I've been to one of them. Next slide. People are, they have a certain period, like 10 minutes, eat as many hot peppers as they can. they do react to the peppers. Most of them are not desensitized, and it's people, practice doing this. They're not only painful, their stomach gets all this irritation too. It's an amazing thing. Next slide. Here, let me give you an example of other ones. Irritant spices, ginger and black pepper produce the same kind of sensation. Bitter foods, coffee, dark chocolate, beer. They're innately negative. Little kids don't like those things. We get to love them. We like the bitter. People add Campari to their drinks. That's really bitter. People get to like very hot or cold foods. Iced soda is not popular in most of the world because they don't have refrigerators in many parts, but then you have to get used to it. People enjoy fright. They like thrill rides. They like roller coasters. And as you were saying, Jack, what's the roller coaster you like? The scariest one you can stand.
Yeah.
They like very hot baths. When you get into a hot bath, it's first a little painful, right? Then you get used to it. Some people like that burn at the beginning. They like to jump into cold water. And that first feeling, even if it doesn't feel cold after a minute, the first few seconds when you jump into the ocean or something, usually you get a cold flash, right? I won't go in. I hate that cold flash. But there are people who love it. Physical exhaustion. To me, two of the most interesting things are sad events. People intentionally pay to be exposed to things that make them sad and cry. Movies, plays, paintings, music. As far as we know, no animal does any of these things. Can you imagine your dog paying to get on a roller coaster? And the last thing is disgust. And disgust is not innately negative. We don't have disgust is not present until about 3 years of age, and it doesn't reach its full form until about 5, but it is negative, and we play with disgust. Here are some examples of playing with disgust. It's offensive. Next slide. These are fart cushions, right? People are playing, they're paying to make believe they're farting, or make
$50
someone else
too.
sit on them and make believe they're farting.
Yeah,
Next
that's not
slide.
cheap.
Next slide, Jack. This is a Klebon cartoon. A man and his fly are sitting in a fancy restaurant, and he says, I love the gazpacho, leeks vinaigrette with shrimp, marinated zucchini, orange mousse, a bottle of Côte de Rhône Rouge, 59, and bring some shit for my fly. Now that's ridiculous. It's disgusting. But somehow or other, people pay to see these things. Next slide. Now, notice you're not really sitting with the fly. This is my most favorite dish that I ever ate in terms of describing. It's in a restaurant called Boar in Copenhagen. We ate a whole sheep, basically, in this meal. And included in that were the 2 eyes of a sheep. And in case you didn't know that they were the eyes, they put the glasses right in front of the eyes. They weren't very good, by the way. But anyway, the next slide. Finally, this is in the Franklin Institute of Philadelphia, the major museum. There was an exhibit on the body and what the body produces. And this is supposed to be a colon, and that's supposed to be the anus right there. And kids crawl through it, and they come out into a pole of plastic shit, right? And everyone's going, the kids are waiting online to get through this, and their parents are photographing them all over the place. So people are enjoying this, but you notice that there's not really a threat here. And all of these examples of benign masochism, jumping out of a plane, getting into the hot bath, you're not going to get hurt. And you know it. And so you can enjoy the fact that your body is saying, don't do this, and you know it's okay. Okay, next slide. We're almost through here. So it's critical that it's not real. The threat is not, and similarly in a sad movie, by the way, it's not really sad, right? It's just a fiction. People do not enjoy watching Holocaust movies. They may watch it because they think it's important to see it. So it's mind over body. Next slide. Just to give you an idea of how it's really important to know how people get to like foods. Really important for all of you. You're introducing new foods. You would think that the family is the way you get to like it, right? Because you got the genes of your parents, they're presenting the food, you're reading with them. There's surprisingly low correlation in preferences between parents and their children. If you know correlation, it's 0.15, that's very low. Mother-child correlations are not higher than father-child, even though traditionally the mother's doing most of the feeding and presenting to the child. And same-sex parent correlations are not higher than opposite-sex parents. That is, little boys are not more like their father than their mother. But the first thing is the real interesting. And it's true for music too. So somehow, with both the genes and the early environment, we're not getting much now. Now, if you're in a culture that eats chili pepper like Mexico, it's not just your parents, it's everybody who's eating, all your friends and everything. And that may be very important. And also, it may be that adolescence, for example, is a particularly important period for acquiring pepper. It is not true that the foods kids get in their first years of life are the most important foods that they like. That is not true. And if you think about it, you wouldn't want that to be true because milk is their first food. And in our history, milk was not available to people after they weaned because there wasn't milk, there wasn't dairy until 6,000 or 8,000 years ago. Next slide.
How old were the children in the study, Paul?
The children were adults and they were college students and their parents were their parents.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay, so they're adults. Yes, that's a good point. Next slide. By the way, in the same population, if we look at values like attitude to abortion, they correlate rather highly with their parents. So it's not that their parents are failing to transmit something. It's that they're failing to transmit this sort of preference thing. Next slide. Okay, so just to summarize, we have an innate aversion to irritant taste. Chili pepper has one. Exposure in some way produces liking, probably either by social influence or by benign masochism. Chili peppers are cultivated, varying the irritant properties, getting very hot ones, not so hot ones. It's incorporated into cuisine as a flavor principle, and it's eaten and enjoyed daily by billions of people. Billions of people. Next slide. We have the following remaining questions. How did it spread from Mexico to around the world? Well, they were already eating black pepper, which is irritant. And black pepper is expensive and chili pepper is cheap. So that's one thing, but it's still then you could say, why do they like black pepper? We don't know the role of social or benign masochism or perhaps other things and how they're acquired. We know that when you like chili pepper, your mouth likes it. Your skin might like it. You know, you get the muscle rubs that you can buy. That's got capsaicin in it, but you don't like it in your eyes. We don't know if you like it in your anus or not. Nobody's looked at that. There's a lot of it because of people who eat a lot of it. It's chili pepper. We don't know what makes people not like or like the pure burn, the burn without any food. And we just have begun to think as restaurateurs of the symphony of chili burns and flavors that Mexicans enjoy with every meal. It's like wine for them. It's got all these highlights, all these special things. And that's a world that most people in the world have never experienced. So I think that's what I'm going to stop and say. I hope you learned something.
If I could ask a couple of questions on benign masochism. So we know that it exists, and we know it exists in lots of different contexts. Do we know why it exists in humans? Is it because we want to experience greater emotion in our life? Is it?
Well, that's an interesting question. One reason is mastery is a very important, I don't know the answer to that question, but mastery is people really enjoy mastering things. And in some sense, you're mastering these things. You're doing them and your body is saying, don't do them, but you're overriding it. So there are a lot of things we do that don't involve innate aversions that involve mastery, that people enjoy getting good at things. So this may be a subset of that.
I know you have a couple of appendix slides too. Do you want to walk through?
No, I don't. I didn't. I just have them there because I was making up the talk, and I never throw out the slides after my. But yeah. I'm happy to take questions about this, or as Jack said, other things.
Yeah, Marie, anything pop up? If not, I have a few.
Yeah, one question. I think this is a matter of personal response or preference, but someone asked, are chili peppers the same chili pepper? Is it actually hotter to some people, or is it just a matter of your own personal tolerance?
Okay, it is probably true that people vary in how much burn they get, because we know people vary in the degree and the density of taste receptors. There's no reason to think they wouldn't vary in the density of irritant receptors. And Linda Bartoshuk, who does a lot of work on taste, has sort of found that there's a relationship between how many bitter receptors you are and your sensitivity to chili pepper. So there are people who are just have a lot more receptors. So, and in the case of bitter, we know that there's a strong genetic component to that. That is, there's an inherited sensitivity to bitter.
Hmm.
No, we
Okay,
have a
and
lot
then,
of, oh, go ahead, Marie, sorry.
this is sort of interesting. Do you know if there's a correlation, Paul, between chili peppers and acid reflux?
Well, chili pepper definitely causes gastric secretion. And you know, in the old days, you weren't supposed to eat spices when you had ulcers, which are related to gastric secretion. Actually, that was a funny thing because that's a case where medicine was misguided. They said, don't eat spices. I had an ulcer when I was in my 20s. I've never had one since. And the doctor said, don't eat spices. And I love spicy food. Well, it turned out, first of all, most spices have nothing to do with gastric secretion. Things like cinnamon or clove, but it's the irritant spices, chili and ginger and a few others, black pepper. So they shouldn't have said spices, but that was a word. It was easy to say, don't eat X. And they didn't bother to segment it out into the things. So yes, it is true that I don't know what the one of the questions you could ask now is reflux more common in Mexico than it is in the United States? And it could well be, and I don't know, it's a very interesting question. We could probably find that out on the internet in the next 5 minutes. But I don't know the answer to it.
Yeah, interesting.
I had a quick question. You know, a lot of us that are on this webinar today are responsible for creating new foods, marketing new foods, creating new menu items and whatnot. Is there anything around sort of neophobic versus neophilic consumers that would inform how we should go and bring brand new things to market and have them be successful out of the gate?
Yeah, well, so what Jack is referring to is neophobic are people who are phobic about eating new foods, or there are people who are phobic about anything new, but some people just about foods. So the question is, how do you appeal to the neophilic people, the people who like new things are no problem for your new dishes, right?
Yeah.
It's the people who are not are put off by new. They, of course, most people who are neophobic eventually get to like certain food. It's just more of a gradual process. You probably want to start with a very weak form, as you would with coffee when you would first make it very sweet. And I suppose, though I never saw this, that with chili pepper, you'd start with very slightly hot things.
Yeah.
So, you know, your mouth just has a little tingle. And that's what you could do with a neophobic person. So you give them something familiar with just a little bit of difference, and hopefully they get used to that, and then you make it a little more. But for serving people, people don't come into restaurants labeled as neophobic or neophilic, of course. And sometimes in the same party, you'll have both. So there are people who are neophobic will probably not go to the newest restaurant for a Chinese cuisine that they've never heard of, because that's almost certainly going to be, you know, I remember when Szechuan first came in, there were people who were leery. Then there was Hunan cuisine, and there's all kinds of more exotic cuisines. They may be delicious, but there are people who are put off from that. Other people like me, I'd go there if I never heard of that kind of cuisine. That's what I want to do. So, and if you think about it, a lot of the more exotic cuisines, like say Burmese cuisine, is delicious, just delicious. And there aren't many restaurants, and that most people don't go to there. They don't say, well, what is that? I don't even know if Chinese people, by the way, like other Asian cuisines, other East Asian food. I'm sure they don't like Indian food, but they might like Thai food, which is similar in many ways to China, but they might not. They might say that's just bad Chinese food. I don't know if you would know that, Jack.
Well, we look at it, and one of the things that we find is if you take something unknown and put it on something that's well known and liked, that's a way of easing people into it. So I guess it's a version of starting with a weak version.
Yes, it is. And with eating insects, which I study, the best way to get people started is with powdered insects. So that it's just like flour. So they know it's insects, but it doesn't taste bad. And then you can get them eventually maybe to eat a whole grasshopper on a pizza.
Yeah, there's an interesting phenomenon too, where if you have a brand new flavor, and let's say we're talking about a dish at a restaurant, if you put the name of that flavor that no one's ever heard of in the item name, in the name of the item, people tend not to order it. But if you bury it in the description of the item, they'll give that dish credit for being new and interesting, but it will not have scared them away. So
And if you don't mention it at all, it might even be better for some people.
it might even be better, but you lose the idea that you're having something interesting.
Yes, no, that's true. I would try anything new immediately. I
Right.
bet you would too. But there are lots of people.
To some extent,
who,
I would not have that goat eyeball thing that you showed us. That's
well,
not-
I've eaten live ants too at a very fancy restaurant.
Oh, man.
But I feel like benign masochism also explains, our relationship with alcohol to some extent. Really sharp cheeses. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Oh, absolutely. Stinky cheese is a fascinating thing. Many people are totally disgusted by it, and other people love it. And not only that, but some people who love it say, I can't stand the smell of it, but it tastes great.
Yeah.
So they try to get it into their mouth fast. That's crazy because most of the taste is the smell coming up from their mouth, but that's what they say.
The trick is we don't know what each person's individual threshold is.
That's right.
Unless we test them. So I guess that's a big challenge for marketers is how do we allow people to choose that option themselves? Or is there stuff through technology where we start learning what people's thresholds are and market individually?
Well, of course, yeah. When you order a pizza, you have a lot of choices about what to put on the top. So the person can have some exotic stuff. I don't think most people would be upset that a pizzeria offered an exotic topping as long as they didn't eat it.
Right. Yeah.
So people are, just as vegetarians tolerate meat eating in their friends, I think neophobic people tolerate neophilia in their friends, but they don't want it in their mouth.
Right.
And of course, if it smells like the cheese, that's a potential problem.
Yeah, I think that thing you said about mastery is so true too. I mean, here in Nashville, we have Hattie B's hot chicken, and they have various levels of hot that you could pick. And I'm like on level 3, and I want to get to the top level, which is shut the cluck up. But I know I'm not there yet. But it's an ambition of mine to be able to eat.
How many levels stand between you and that, Jack?
I think I'm 2 levels away, so I'm nowhere near the top. But
no, I didn't like when I started this research. I didn't like hot peppers. And I had a lot, of course, in Mexico and other places, and I got to like them. But I like a very low, relatively low level of burn. I'm way below you, I expect, and I have no ambition like you do too. I mean, my desire for mastery does not extend to the hotness of foods I eat. But it's interesting. So you can decide, where does my mastery matter? Or you don't actually decide that, but it turns out that you really care about being good at something. And we can say being good at chili pepper is both eating it hot, but also appreciating the aromas, the flavors. Each of these peppers has its own flavor.
yeah, and I know we don't have a grand answer to this question yet, but if it's not genetics or your early environment that shapes your preferences, do you have theories on what it likely is?
Well, let's just say that I don't even believe my own data that correlation is so low, but I'm sure it's positive. So there's some effect of your family. I think my guess is there's a lot of stuff that goes on in adolescence, and where any of you who've had an adolescent child know that you hardly ever see them. I mean, their friends are their lives, and parents are necessary accessories, and so that's a very powerful group. Now there is data on music liking, but people over 40, you say, "What's your favorite music?" This is work by a fellow named Schindlinger. And what he's found is that the music you hear between age 15 and 30 is the music that you love most for the rest of your life, not before 15. Now that starts with adolescence, but it goes past that. And we've done a little work on that. We get the same result. And the nice thing about music, unlike food, is that it's very time locked, that a certain type of music comes in, everybody's listening to it, the young people. And then it declines, and a few years later, it's another kind. That doesn't happen in the food world, where a food becomes widely consumed for a couple of years, and then it drops off the menus. So music is an easier place to do that.
And maybe to wrap things up, is there a distinction between actually liking something and sort of convincing yourself or thinking that you like something? So if I don't like chicken salad sandwiches, but I'm a big, Kim Kardashian fan, and she talks about how she loves them. And I start saying to myself, oh, I like that too, because I like her. Is that the same as me actually liking it?
Well, I would say no. Liking it means liking the experience in your mouth. People eat a lot of foods they don't like because they think it's healthy,
Right.
because it's sort of necessary if they're economically challenged, because it's cheap. So, and one of the things, of course, about flavors like hot pepper is if you can take relatively benign food like corn mash or wheat flour, water, and make it much richer and more experienced by adding these flavors to it. But I think you can distinguish between eating something because you like it and eating something for some extrinsic reason, like you want to impress your friends or you think it's good for your heart or something like that.
Well, we're at time. Dr. Rozin and Maria, I wanted to say thank you both, especially you, Dr. Rozin, for taking time out today. I know we're working on a few more things together, and we'll do another one of these in the future. But thanks, everybody.
Well, it's my pleasure, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.